Hi YouTube, it's Autumn. I'm coming to you today with a very different kind of video. So first, I expect that can you hear that? That's the first thing I was going to talk about. That noise in the background is my bird Vincent, and I wanted to explain that because if you watch my channel regularly, then you're already familiar with her, but I have a feeling that this video will bring a lot of people that don't normally come to my channel. So I wanted those people to be aware of what all that noise is. Vincent is my parrot. She's an African gray. She is quiet all day until I start filming a video, and then she knows it's time to talk because I'm talking. So you'll hear her in the background, and I hope that's not too annoying. When I watch the videos back, it seems kind of quiet in the background, so hopefully that's okay with you and doesn't distract you too much. I am wearing my glasses today because I have written out an outline of what I'm going to talk about, which I don't normally do, and I've typed it up. It's on the computer screen right next to the little film box that I'm watching. And so I'm going to be referring to that so that, because I have a lot to say about this, and I want to try to keep it straight, so I made sure to have an outline. So forgive me if I look away from the lens there. The second thing I wanted to start off by saying is that I do have permission from my mother and my sister to tell this story. I would not have told it without their permission, out of respect for them. I won't be using anybody's names, but okay, that's said now. So the reason I'm doing this video, and you can tell from the title what it's about, my father, the cocaine addict. So the reason I'm doing it is because I know that there are lots of people out there in the world who are going through similar situations. Maybe you are a parent going through the situation and you have kids that are also in the situation. This can give you a perspective on what kinds of things they go through and how it affects them later in life. Or it could be that you don't have kids, or maybe you are a kid going through it. So anyway, there are lots of different audiences for this, and I'm filming it because I feel like people can relate, and I hope that it can help people, at the very least, just to feel like you're not alone, that there are other people who go through things like what you're going through. My channel generally is about luxury goods, specifically Louis Vuitton, hence that book back there. And this does relate to that some because all these experiences, and I'll explain a little more at the very end of the video when I talk about how this experience affected other aspects of my life. But this will give you a little perspective into where I'm coming from, and yeah, just a little perspective into where I'm coming from, because even though I have some nice things, I'm certainly not wealthy. I wish I was, and I come from a different background than you might think. So here we go. In the beginning, so my family never had much money. I'm trying to scroll down a little bit. Sorry, bear with me. It's a little bit of a learning curve here. So we never had much money. My mom did office jobs, like secretarial work. My father was a truck driver, and we never took any kind of real vacations. We did take one. We went to Disney World once. We drove there in our Astro van. Remember those? But otherwise, the vacations that we took were camping trips. So we stayed in tents. We didn't have an RV or anything like that. My parents did own the homes, most of them, that we lived in. And by most of them, there are 2 houses that we lived in, and then there was a trailer when I was a little kid, but 2 houses that I spent the bulk of my childhood in. And one was a rental. So the one that I spent most of my childhood in, they owned. Okay, and they rented before that then. We also, for a lot of the time when I was younger, we had a boat. I remember we had one that broke down all the time, and eventually they bought a brand new one. So they were able to spend some extra income on that, but we never did anything fancy. Like, besides camping, the other vacations we would take were to visit my father's family up in Michigan. And if you don't know, I'm in Houston. I was born and raised in Houston. When we went to Michigan, my parents would like switch off driving, just take turns, and we would sleep in the car. I don't remember us stopping at hotels or motels or anything. We slept in the car, and we ate out of the ice chest in the back. We had sandwiches and snacks and stuff. So never anything fancy. And even when we went to Disney, it was a decent place. It wasn't like a rundown, filthy place, but it was a cheap hotel, motel, I'm sure. For as long as I can remember, my father had drugs in the house, and all I ever saw was marijuana. And I remember that he had this orange plastic tray that he kept in the back of a filing cabinet in the den in the house that had pot, and he'd always had that. And I remember in the master bedroom in the closet there was a metal scale to weigh pot. So I saw that in the house. I have never done drugs myself because of all this, because I have seen the ramifications of it. I am somebody who thinks pot should be legalized. I generally don't have a problem with that. Generally, sometimes I do. That's a different story. But other drugs, harder drugs, I do have a problem with. And yeah. So when this all started, the first thing I remember was that when I was in 5th grade, he lost his job as a truck driver. And he never held another job after that. He had some odd jobs here and there. He was hired as a truck driver a couple different times, but I mean, he could go years without having a job. So my mom was the sole breadwinner in the house and tried her best to take care of all the financial stuff that we needed. Let's see. So another job he had, which I thought it ended up being pretty ironic, was that he went into training and became a corrections officer and worked briefly at some kind of facility near a prison. And I'll tell you later about when he ended up in prison, but at some point he ended up in prison and ended up in there with some of the people that he was the correction officer of. So that was interesting. Anyway, I'm going to go back here to where I was. So he lost that job when I was in 5th grade. When I was in middle school, I remember our boat being repossessed. So that was pretty much the end of our vacations, because the only reason we went camping, we went to lakes and we took the boat out. So I don't think we did much after that in the way of vacations. I mean, we never even really went to like the local theme park or water park or anything like that. We didn't go to Galveston more than a couple of times that I remember. We really didn't do anything like that. I mean, even just going to the movies was a big deal because that was expensive for my family. When the really bad stuff started was when I was in high school. The first thing I remember, the first inkling I got that something was wrong, was when, so I was in an arts high school and I was doing photography. And the camera that I had, which was actually my mother's camera that my father had bought for my mother before all this stuff was going on. So that camera was missing. And I was racking my brain thinking about where I could have left it, and if I left it somewhere where, somebody could have taken it, or I couldn't find this camera. And like out of the blue, this thought came to me that my father had pawned it. And nothing like that had ever happened, so I'm not sure where that thought had came from, but I turned out to be correct. He had pawned it for drug money. I remember my mother sitting me down once and telling me that my father was doing cocaine. And I don't remember much about that conversation. I just remember her telling me that. I remember crying. And I found out later that he had started doing it to stay awake while he was driving trucks, because they pressure you to go these very long distances, and to be able to do that in a certain amount of time, you don't get as much sleep as you really should have. So he took the cocaine to stay awake. He also took it at some parties that he went to with their friends. Now I've scrolled a little bit too far and got out of order. Okay. So from that point on, things came up missing all the time. And when they came up missing, we knew what happened to them. We knew that he took them. And when we'd confront him about it, he always lied. Even when you knew that he took it and there was no other explanation, he would lie about it. He would get really angry that you were accusing him. He'd yell at you. He would try to make you feel like you did something that lost to lose it. Or, like, I remember one time with the camera, because he took the camera multiple times and pawned it. I remember him telling me something about he went out to the car and the car was unlocked and that I had left it unlocked, and somebody must have figured that out and got into the car and took the camera. And I wasn't sure whether to believe that, because it's plausible. So I was beating myself up about it. But of course it turned out that he took it. So anytime he'd take something, he'd lie about it. And the pattern was, if he hadn't sold it, he had pawned it. And if he'd pawned it, he'd deny, and wait until the last day before the pawn ticket was due, and then give the pawn tickets, the stack of pawn tickets, to my mother to go pay to get our stuff back. And she wasn't able to get everything back because she was taking care of everything else in the house, the mortgage and the bills and feeding us and clothing us and, whatever else we needed. So there were a lot of things we lost, but she did get all the important stuff. She always got my camera back. I don't remember what else, but she did always get the camera back. Some other things that he pawned, things like CDs, our VCR, the lawnmower, bicycles, jewelry. My mother had this little jewelry box that looked like a pirate's trunk, like a treasure chest. And I remember as a kid looking through that little jewelry box and sort of playing with things. And my favorite thing in there, and I think maybe her favorite thing too, was she had this silver charm bracelet that she'd had from when she was a kid. And she had charms from when she was when her parents took her to Disneyland. She had a charm from that, and from when she was a cheerleader in middle school and all this stuff. And that was one of the things that he pawned and we never got back. And there are things that to this day, something will come to one of our minds and we'll think, oh, whatever happened to that? Oh yeah, he took it and it's missing and, it got pawned. So we don't have it because of him. It's kind of funny though, the charm bracelet, after they eventually got divorced, and I'll tell you now because I don't have it anywhere else in the outline, but all of this went on for about 10 years. So we lived in this situation with him for about 10 years, so a lot happened. That's why I have so much to talk about. After they got divorced, she got herself a new charm bracelet, and she has a post-divorce charm bracelet, and she has done a lot since then, but I'll talk about that at the end. And because of her bracelet, I also have one, not a post-divorce bracelet, but just a charm bracelet because I always liked the one that she had as a kid. As far as I know, he didn't steal from anyone except us. There's one exception that I'm aware of, and that was that he took a neighbor's lawnmower once. But I think he mostly only stole from his wife and children. The worst thing that he ever took from me is that growing up, I always wanted to be a Disney animator. I'm an artist. I loved Disney movies, and that was my dream. There was never anything else I wanted to do. I went to college to become an animator, at least for a little while. So when I was in high school and I had like some weekend summer jobs, what I spent my money on was Disney books. The Disney store had just opened up at that time, and that was a new thing. And I would go there and buy books, and they were expensive. $40 for a book, or $60 for a book, or $100 for a book. And I would save my money up and buy these books because they showed some of the history of the animation and some of the drawings and the production process. So it was all very interesting to me. And I came home one day and I had stacks of these books and they were all gone. And at that time, there weren't places like Half Price Books. There weren't places like Amazon. You couldn't replace those books. So now I could get any of them again with all the resources we have on the internet. But back then, those were irreplaceable items for me. And he took all of them, and all the money that I'd spent on them was gone. So that was the worst thing in my mind that he ever did to me, specifically as far as stealing something. Another really bad thing that he did was I had a neighbor who I had befriended who was a musician, and that neighbor let me borrow some CDs that he had that were CDs of him and his music and a band that he was in. And I came home one day and those were missing. And I went and told the neighbor about it. The neighbor got mad at me, yelled at me, and I went home in tears. And then the neighbor knocked on the door and I answered the door in tears. And the neighbor stormed into the house and yelled at my father. And my father denied taking them. But then the next day they showed up magically. So those are some of the worst things that he stole, physical things. There was never any physical or sexual abuse or anything like that in the house. It was all emotional. And I never felt unsafe. I never thought that he would hurt us. There was one time that I was scared, but that was not, there was some violence, but it wasn't directed at us. Something had happened, I don't remember what, with him at work. I don't know if he got fired or something. And he came home and he kicked over our mailbox, and the mailbox was mounted on this like 4x4 wooden post, and he kicked the thing down. He may have broken the post in half even. And he came in the house and he's yelling and screaming and very angry and punched a hole through the bathroom door. And I remember telling my mother that I was scared. I remember her telling him, "You're scaring the kids." And I think he calmed down. He either calmed down or he left. But that was a very rare incident. So there was never any kind of violence directed at us. We also never went without food. My mother made sure that we always had food. However, he ate all of our food. So for example, his favorite thing to eat all of was Bluebell ice cream, which is a local ice cream creamery if you're not familiar with it. So you buy it in half gallons, those big tubs, and he would eat the whole thing in a day, and we were lucky if we got any of it. And he did that with a lot of the food. He didn't seem to care if we still had food to eat. He didn't care about rationing food so that we'd have food for the rest of the week. He just ate whatever he wanted and as much as he wanted and was very gluttonous about it. And didn't care about us. Another thing we didn't have was a telephone. So, there were times when we had a telephone, but, back then it was just landlines. We didn't have cell phones or anything yet. And I want to say we went years without having a telephone. And those are cheap. They're not expensive, but that gives you an idea of how poor we were. It seemed like every other month or so, or maybe every month, something was turned off, be it the electricity or the water. So it was very frequent that we'd come home to no electricity or no water, and we would have to, bathe from buckets in the tub from water we either got from a neighbor or from gallons of water at the grocery store, or we just went, a day, maybe 2 days without bathing because we didn't have water. So all this was happening while I was in while I was in high school. And I went to college during this 10 years that all this was going on. I was the first in my family to go to college. Like I said, I wanted to be a Disney animator. I applied to the 2 top schools in the country for that. I was accepted into both. I went to the one in New York. There was one in California, one in New York. I went to the one in New York because they offered me more scholarship money. But they're, as colleges are, and especially private colleges, they're very, very expensive. It was going to cost something like $100,000 for me to go there for all 4 years. I had some scholarship money, but it barely made a dent. And my mother took out a second mortgage on the house to be able to help pay for my school. I ended up staying there for 3 semesters, so about a year and a half. And then I had to come home because we couldn't afford it anymore. And I was also ready to come home. I'd figured out at that point that animation was really not my thing. It was a lot more mathematical and tedious than I had expected it to be. And I was ready to move on to something different. So it wasn't just money, but money was a big reason of the timing of when I came home. So when I came home, my father drove up to get me and all my stuff, and he brought that Astro van that we still had. And this was in January, and a huge blizzard, right when we were leaving, hit the Northeast. And this Astro van had no heat. So I remember us driving in Tennessee, and there was a ton of snow, and it was below freezing. And we couldn't get more than, a quarter mile, maybe a half mile in these hills of Tennessee with, the way I remembered it was drop-offs, but I think it was more hilly, but it was pretty steep and scary for me. But we couldn't get very far without having to stop the car, and he would get out and have to scrape the ice off the windshield. So that took some extra time getting home. And then when we got to the Mason-Dixon line, the transmission fell out of the vehicle, literally fell out of the vehicle. So we stopped and we had to stay at this little motel for a couple nights while they ordered parts and got the car fixed. I don't know where the money came from for that. But I remember that we had an ice chest where we had bread and mayonnaise and bologna. We had stuff for sandwiches. And my father wanted to order a pizza, and that was $20. And I got into a big fight with him because he was spending my mother's money on food when we already had food. And he would yell at me and say he could do whatever he wanted because he's the adult and blah, blah, blah. So that's the kind of guy he was. He just did not care. He put himself and all of us in this situation. Vincent, no. And yeah, that's one of the memories I have of how selfish he was. What's next here? So, hold on, I feel like I have skipped something. No, I guess not. Sorry. Okay, now I know where I am. All right, sorry about that. So, sometime after I came back home from college, I moved back into home because I had no money to be able to go out and get my own place. And I was 19, so still pretty young. At some point, my mother kicked him out of the house, but Texas is a no-fault state, I think that's the word for it, where the way she explained it to me at the time, she couldn't legally kick him off the property. He had a legal right to be there. So he just moved into our garage. We had a big garage in the backyard. And he built himself this little secret corner in the back of the garage. that was kind of barricaded with shelving and things around, so we weren't able to like sneak up on him and see what we were doing, see what he was doing. He always knew when we were coming, and like he used buckets to go to the bathroom, and I don't know how he bathed. I don't remember that, but it was pretty gross. And he lived out there and wouldn't leave, refused. None of us wanted him there. And while we were gone, so while my sister was gone to high school and I was gone to my college classes because I enrolled in another college in Houston, and while my mother was at work, what he would do is on the back of our house, we had these windows that were slats of glass in these little grooves. He was able to take the glass panels out and get into the house that way, because we had it, locked otherwise, but he still got into the house, and he would steal things from us. And it took us a while to figure out that that's what was happening, when we figured out that things were missing. Let's see. And when I came, okay, I think I have this a little bit out of order. Maybe not. No, this was all happening at the same time. So when I came back from New York and I moved back in at home, while I was gone, my sister took my bedroom. So when I came back, she stayed in that bedroom, and I took her old bedroom. And her old bedroom was a converted garage. So it used to be a garage. It was originally a garage, but it was converted into a bedroom. And because of that, it had this window that went between my room and her room. And it was like a 2-paneled window. The top had glass in it, but the bottom was just open. So like we could, reach in and pass things to each other through this bottom opening of the window. Oh gosh, my computer's telling me. I'm almost out of space here. So I'm going to stop the video for now and start back up.